What if everything we know about the story of humanity is only the last chapter of a book far older than we imagine? We stand in glittering cities, armed with satellites and skyscrapers, convinced we are the first to conquer the Earth with intelligence and technology. But the ground beneath our feet is 4.5 billion years old. Oceans have risen and vanished, continents have broken and collided, 5 mass extinctions have come and gone. In that vastness of time, is it really certain that we are the first? Think of it. Entire civilizations could have bloomed and perished long before humans appeared. Their cities ground into dust by glaciers, their knowledge melted into the mantle, their bones dissolved into soil. What would survive after 10 million years? A whisper in stone, a chemical anomaly, a myth passed down in distorted fragments. The silence of the geological record may not be proof that nothing came before. It may be the perfect disguise. Tonight we'll drift into that silence together, following faint clues, strange stories, and echoes buried in deep time to ask the question that history itself refuses to answer. The Earth is unimaginably old. About 4.5 billion years of restless movement, shifting seas, and colliding continents. To put that in perspective, if the history of Earth were compressed into a single calendar year, humans would appear only in the last few minutes of December 31st. Civilization as we know it, with writing, agriculture, and cities, would emerge only in the final seconds before midnight. Everything we consider history is barely a flicker compared to the planet's vast timeline. This scale is the first shock. We think of the pyramids of Egypt as ancient, yet they are only about 4,500 years old. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia rise around the same time. Stonehenge is perhaps 5,000 years old. Even Göbekli Tepe, with its enigmatic stone circles, takes us back just 12,000 years. Already that feels impossibly distant, a stretch of time longer than all of written history combined. But compared to Earth's true age, these wonders are nothing more than scratches on the surface of a mountain. For most of Earth's life, there were no humans at all. The dinosaurs dominated for over 150 million years, and even they represent only a fraction of the planet's story. Before them, strange amphibians and reptiles filled swamps. Before that, trilobites scuttled across shallow seas. For billions of years, life existed only in microscopic form, invisible to the naked eye, yet slowly writing the story of evolution. It is in this immensity of time that the unsettling question arises. If Earth has hosted so much life through so many ages, could intelligence have sparked before us? Could entire civilizations have come and gone, erased not by conspiracy, but by geology itself? Our confidence that we are first is rooted not in certainty, but in silence. Archaeology finds no ancient skyscrapers, no fossilized machines, no inscriptions older than a few thousand years. But silence is not proof. The fossil record itself is notoriously incomplete. For every species we know, dozens more left no trace. The chances of fossilization are slim, requiring sudden burial, the right minerals, and just enough luck to survive shifting rock for millions of years. Most organisms vanish without a whisper. If life itself is recorded so poorly, why would civilizations fare any better? Consider how fragile our own achievements are. Leave a modern city untended for a few centuries, and nature takes over. In Chernobyl, abandoned since 1986, forests have invaded apartments, wild animals roam the streets, and buildings sag under their own weight. Just a few decades without humans, and the outlines already blur. In tropical climates, humidity and vegetation erase structures even faster. Angkor Wat, once the heart of a vast Khmer empire, lay hidden under jungle growth until rediscovered in the 19th century. And that was after only a few hundred years. Imagine a few thousand years, then a few million. Even stone monuments are not invincible. Weather carves them grain by grain. Wind polishes their surfaces smooth. Earthquakes crack them apart. Floods cover them with silt. The Sphinx in Egypt still stands, but its body shows deep scars of erosion. The great statues of Easter Island were toppled, buried, and in many cases forgotten until recent centuries. What seems eternal in human eyes is fleeting when measured against geological time. Now think about the Earth's processes themselves. Entire mountain ranges rise and collapse. The Himalayas, tallest on Earth, are only about 50 million years old, younger than some species of insects. The ocean floor is younger still, most of it less than 200 million years old, continually swallowed and remade by tectonic plates. Whatever once existed there is gone, recycled into the mantle, its story melted into magma. If a civilization had lived by the sea, as almost all human ones have, its cities could have been erased not once but many times over. This is why scientists speak of deep time. It is not just years but layers, stacked, shifted, and erased. The Grand Canyon offers a glimpse of this, its walls banded with strata spanning nearly 2 billion years. Yet even here, vast gaps exist, called unconformities, where millions of years of rock were eroded away before new layers formed. What was lost in those blank spaces? Entire landscapes, whole chapters of Earth's memory. Perhaps more. The absence of evidence feels decisive until you remember how small our window is. Civilization as we define it has existed for about 12,000 years. Agriculture, cities, writing, and metallurgy are confined to the Holocene, a warm interglacial period. That is less than a heartbeat in planetary terms. If another intelligence had risen 50 million years ago, or 100, would we expect to find their pottery shards in a museum? Would their metal tools survive in recognizable form? Or would all of it have been broken down, buried, or transformed into something unrecognizable? Even within recorded human history, how much is already lost? Entire scripts remain undeciphered. Linear A of the Minoans, the glyphs of the Indus Valley, Rongorongo of Easter Island. Cities described in legend, like Troy, were once dismissed as myth until spades struck stone. Others, like Atlantis or Lemuria, may be pure invention. But the persistence of such stories reminds us of something. We know that memory fades quickly, that stories distort easily, and that even within a few thousand years the line between fact and legend becomes difficult to trace. Extend that process across millions of years, and silence is exactly what we should expect. The unsettling thought, then, is not that we have failed to find evidence of prior civilizations. It is that we may not be able to. The Earth does not keep a tidy archive. It keeps fragments, scattered and stitched together, often out of order. Most of what was ever written, built, or dreamed on this planet is gone. Yet that silence has weight. It makes us wonder about our own fragility. If we vanished tomorrow, how long would our memory last? How much of our world would survive 1,000,000 years from now? Perhaps just a chemical fingerprint in sediments, a faint layer of plastic dust, a spike in carbon isotopes? To a future intelligence, would that look like civilization or just another odd natural anomaly? This is not evidence, but recognition. A recognition that time runs deeper than any history we can trace, that memory is fragile, and that the Earth itself is skilled at erasure. Whether another civilization ever walked here before us may remain forever uncertain. What is certain is that if they did, the silence we hear today is exactly what the planet would leave behind. Picture an abandoned city, left behind only a few decades ago. Windows shattered, vines curling through doorways, rooftops sagging under the weight of rain. The streets that once carried traffic are cracked and buckling, plants pushing through the asphalt. In the silence, you can almost hear the city being reclaimed, not in an explosion, but in a slow, patient unfolding. Now stretch that silence, not for decades or centuries, but for millions of years. What remains then? This is where geology speaks. The Earth is not a still archive, but a restless one. Every surface we see today is temporary, caught in the middle of constant change. Rain falls, rivers cut valleys, wind carves cliffs grain by grain. Frost cracks stone, heat bakes soil into dust. Roots slip into the tiniest fractures, prying apart concrete, shattering rock. Erosion is everywhere, always working. To us it's invisible. To time it is relentless. But weathering is only the beginning. Above the crust, storms and glaciers scour. Below it, the deeper forces rewrite entire landscapes. The Earth's outer shell is broken into plates, floating on molten mantle. They drift, collide, tear apart. When they meet, mountains rise and eventually fall. When they diverge, new seafloor forms swallowing the old. This process, subduction, ensures that most of the ocean floor is young in geological terms, barely 200 million years. Compare that to Earth's 4.5 billion year history, and you see the problem. Most of the world's surface has already been erased and remade dozens of times. If a civilization ever built near a coastline, their traces may have been pulled down into the mantle and melted beyond recognition. Even on land, permanence is an illusion. The Grand Canyon is a geological wonder, revealing layer upon layer of Earth's history. Yet it is also a book full of missing pages. Gaps, called unconformities, stretch across millions of years. Entire epochs of rock were eroded away before new sediments were laid down. What was recorded in those vanished pages? We'll never know, and if cities or civilizations stood on that ground before the erosion, their stories vanished with the stone. Volcanoes add another kind of erasure. Lava flows bury landscapes in moments, sealing them under fire. Ash clouds drift across continents, covering soil in blankets that harden to stone. Sometimes this preserves, as in Pompeii, where people and buildings were entombed. But more often it obliterates, compressing and disguising what lies beneath. Over millions of years, volcanic cycles resurface entire regions, leaving little chance for delicate traces to endure. Glaciers, too, are erasers. During the last ice age, ice sheets miles thick scraped across North America and Europe, grinding mountains flat, carrying boulders hundreds of miles, pulverizing soil into loess that later fed human agriculture. If anything older than the Ice Age had stood there, it was scoured away long before we arrived. When you begin to see the Earth this way, as a recycler rather than a record keeper, the silence grows louder. The absence of evidence becomes less surprising and more inevitable. Even fossils, which feel timeless to us, are rare accidents. The right creature, the right conditions, rapid burial, mineral replacement. Most life vanishes without a trace. How much more fragile would be the remains of cities, tools, languages, or cultures? Here is the unsettling truth. To survive millions of years, an artifact must resist water, air, tectonics, erosion, heat, and burial. Very few things can. And so the geological record is not a faithful diary. It is a patchwork quilt, stitched together from scraps that happen to endure. If we look at our own world, our bridges, our skyscrapers, our satellites, how long would they last if abandoned? A few centuries for the tallest towers, a few thousand years for some stone monuments, 1,000,000 years, and nearly everything is gone. Add the great churn of geology, and the chance of recognition plummets to nearly zero. And so the stage is set. If another civilization lived here before us, we should not expect their monuments to greet us from the cliffs. We should expect silence, broken only by rare, stubborn clues. Anomalies in chemistry, patterns in myth, artifacts out of place. The city in your imagination fades, swallowed by vines, collapsed into rubble, buried under soil, pressed into rock, scraped away by ice, melted into magma. Gone. Yet something about its presence lingers. A ghost not of structures, but of the knowledge that they were once there. That ghost is what we will search for next. When we use the word civilization, our minds instinctively summon certain images. A skyline of towers glittering in the night, a pyramid rising from desert sands, an empire with soldiers, kings, and scrolls of written law. These are the symbols of advancement as we are taught to imagine it. But those symbols reflect only a narrow window of possibility, a lens shaped by the last few thousand years of our own story. If we are to seriously ask whether we are truly the first civilization on Earth, we must first widen that lens. Archaeologists and anthropologists rarely define civilization by skyscrapers or pyramids alone. Instead, they look for a cluster of traits: urban centers, specialized labor, centralized governance, surplus agriculture, organized religion, writing or symbolic systems, long-distance trade. Yet even these traits are flexible. Many cultures identified as civilizations do not tick every box. Some thrived without writing. Others left behind no monumental architecture, only patterns of settlement and soil. Civilization, when seen this way, is not a finish line but a spectrum, a way of organizing life beyond survival, of storing memory and shaping the world across generations. Take Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey. From the air, its remains look like a dense honeycomb of mud-brick homes built wall-to-wall without streets. People climbed ladders and entered through the roofs. Inside, they painted walls with ochre, buried their dead beneath floors, and shared ritual spaces that bound the community together. There were no palaces, no temples, no kings carved in stone. Yet archaeologists regard it as one of the earliest known urban settlements because it embodies the essence of collective living. Or consider the Norte Chico civilization of coastal Peru, known for the city of Caral. Here, as early as 5,000 years ago, people built monumental platform mounds, plazas, and amphitheatres. But there is no evidence of warfare, and surprisingly, no signs of pottery. What they left behind instead were quipu-like chords, possible precursors to recording systems, and layers of preserved reeds showing large-scale agricultural planning. A civilization, yes, but one that looked unlike Mesopotamia or Egypt. Far across the world, the Indus Valley civilization flourished between 2600 and 1900 BCE. It left behind sprawling cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, complete with advanced drainage systems and standardized brick construction. Strikingly, there are no grand palaces or towering monuments. Instead, what survives speaks of a highly organized, possibly egalitarian society where civic planning was the true monument. Even its script, etched on seals, remains undeciphered, a reminder that we can recognize complexity without fully understanding it. Civilization, then, is not defined by size or spectacle. It can take forms that are humble, subtle, even nearly invisible. The Inuit of the Arctic, the Polynesians of the Pacific, or the Aboriginal cultures of Australia sustained complex societies, navigated vast distances, and passed down sophisticated knowledge, often without leaving behind permanent architecture. Complexity was stored in oral traditions, star maps memorized in song, environmental knowledge embedded in ritual, and if such diversity exists within just the last 10,000 years, how much broader might the possibilities be if we extend the question into the deep past? Imagine a civilization that built primarily from wood, fibre, or earth. Their dwellings might have vanished within centuries, leaving only darkened soil, a scattering of pollen grains from cultivated plants, or traces of fire where hearths once glowed. To a geologist millions of years later, such traces might look like nothing more than natural variation. It is also worth remembering how often archaeologists have misread the record. For decades, stone tools from early humans were dismissed as geofacts, random rock fractures. Only patterns of repetition convinced researchers that deliberate hands had shaped them. If it took us so long to recognize the intent behind simple chipped stones from our direct ancestors, what chance would we have of recognizing the traces of a civilization profoundly unlike our own? Our expectations themselves can blind us. We look for what looks like us, cities, metals, scripts, monuments. But intelligence need not announce itself that way. It may choose ephemerality over permanence, cycles over conquest, subtlety over stone. A civilization could reach extraordinary heights of knowledge, science, or philosophy without leaving behind the kinds of markers we habitually search for. The challenge is perspective. To widen our view of civilization is to accept that the past may not resemble the present. We are used to thinking of progress as pyramids, writing, machines. But the deeper truth is that civilization is simply complexity sustained across time. The ability to organize, remember, and transform. And once we define it that way, the possibility that Earth has hosted civilizations before us becomes harder to dismiss. So here is the question. If a civilization did arise long before humanity, but chose materials and methods that leave little trace, would we ever recognize it for what it was? Or would we walk unknowingly over the last echoes of its world? Imagine opening the earth like a book, peeling back its layers of stone as if they were pages. At first glance, it seems to be a complete chronicle. Here are the shells of ancient seas, here the bones of dinosaurs, here the teeth of mammoths. But look closer, and you notice gaps, long stretches of missing chapters, entire stories ripped from the binding. The fossil record is not a library, it is more like a set of scattered notes, preserved by chance rather than design. We often think of fossils as abundant because we see them in museums, carefully reconstructed and displayed. But the truth is that fossilization is astonishingly rare. Most living things never fossilize. Soft tissue decays within days or weeks. Bones are carried off by scavengers, crushed by the weight of soil, or dissolved by water. For preservation to occur, conditions must align perfectly. A body must be buried rapidly, shielded from oxygen, infiltrated by minerals, and then survive millions of years of geological upheaval. Even when all this happens, the specimen must be found before erosion or tectonics destroy it. In reality, what survives is not the rule, but the exception, a lottery in which the odds are stacked against memory. The gaps are vast. For example, dinosaurs lived for more than 150 million years, yet our entire collection of their fossils could fit into a handful of warehouses. For many species, we have only fragments: a single tooth, a partial jaw, the imprint of a feather. How many others left nothing at all? If creatures that dominated the planet for millions of years are known to us only through scattered remains, how much less would survive of a civilization that flourished briefly and long ago? Even within our own lineage, the silence is deafening. Homo erectus survived for nearly 2 million years, far longer than our species has yet existed. And what do we have to show for them? A few skulls, some stone tools, faint evidence of fire. Their songs, their stories, their social lives are invisible. Were they capable of symbolic thought? Did they have myths or art or traditions passed through generations? We cannot know. The material record does not speak that language. It records only what chance has hardened into stone. The same holds true for entire ecosystems. Consider the Lagerstätten, rare fossil sites like the Burgess Shale in Canada or the Messel Pit in Germany. These locations are celebrated precisely because they preserve soft-bodied creatures almost never fossilized elsewhere. Without them, we would have almost no knowledge of the immense diversity of early life. Outside of these rare windows, the record is overwhelmingly biased toward creatures with hard shells, dense bones, or teeth. Soft bodies vanish, delicate structures dissolve. Civilization, if built from wood, fiber, and clay, would be even more fragile than flesh. The record also lies to us in subtler ways. Fossilization tends to favor lowland environments near water, where burial is rapid. Mountain societies, desert peoples, or coastal communities are far less likely to be preserved. Even today, entire cultures leave little trace because of where they lived. Extend that bias over millions of years, and whole civilizations could disappear from memory simply because geology was never on their side. We sometimes comfort ourselves with the idea that stone monuments are eternal, but even they are not immune. Weather and erosion wear them away grain by grain. Earthquakes topple them. Floods bury them in silt. If stone monuments just a few thousand years old can be disfigured almost beyond recognition, what chance would they have after 1 million years? After 10 million? The Earth does not keep souvenirs. It remakes its surface endlessly. One of the clearest examples of loss is the phenomenon of unconformities. Gaps in the geological record where layers of rock representing millions of years are simply gone, eroded away before new layers were deposited. The Grand Canyon, often celebrated as a geological archive, contains unconformities that span hundreds of millions of years. Those pages of history are blank. If a civilization left its traces there, they are gone. Not just hidden, gone. Sometimes the record speaks loudly, but usually only in catastrophe. Mass extinction events leave thick layers of bone, ash, and chemical residue. The boundary marking the end of the dinosaurs is filled with iridium and soot from the asteroid impact 66 million years ago. The Permian-Triassic extinction leaves a scar of carbon shifts and die-offs across continents. But these are exceptions, flashes of violence in an otherwise quiet erasure. Ordinary life and ordinary culture vanishes without drama. This should force us into humility. When scientists discover anomalies in stone, unusual artifacts, puzzling isotopes, unexplained layers, the instinct is to assign natural explanations. And usually they are right. Geology produces marvels on its own. Yet the silence of the fossil record should remind us that the absence of human-like artifacts does not prove that no intelligence came before. It may only prove that the record is too thin to capture it. Even in recent memory, the Earth has erased much. Consider the cities drowned by rising seas after the last ice age. Doggerland in the North Sea, Pavlopetri in Greece, Dwarka off the coast of India. These are only a few thousand years old and already half lost beneath waves. Archaeologists find scattered walls, pottery, and foundations. But imagine them 10 million years from now. The stones ground into sand, the pottery dissolved, the walls crushed under sediment. They would vanish entirely. The fossil record would never reveal that people once lived and thrived there. If this is what happens in mere millennia, then what hope is there for traces of a civilization tens of millions of years old? The Earth is a patient recycler. It grinds, melts, buries, and forgets. Memory survives only in fragments. The rest is silence. And it is that silence that unsettles us most. Not because it proves anything, but because it leaves room for doubt. If we trust only the fossil record, then our history is built on scraps. And scraps cannot rule out the possibility that other stories once filled the missing pages. In the hands of a geologist, a simple cylinder of rock becomes a diary. Drill into the seabed or into ancient cliffs, and each layer reveals its own entry. The pollen of vanished forests, the soot of old fires, the isotopes of carbon and oxygen that whisper of climates long gone. To the untrained eye, these bands look like nothing more than stripes of mud hardened into stone. But to those who know how to read them, they are stories. And sometimes the stories are strange. The Earth's layers carry anomalies, sudden changes that break the expected rhythm of life. At one point, carbon dioxide levels spike dramatically. At another, oxygen levels collapse. Thin sheets of ash stretch across continents. Rare metals like iridium or platinum appear in concentrations far higher than normal. These shadows are records of disruption. Most can be explained by natural events: an asteroid impact, a flood basalt eruption, a destabilized climate. But some patterns echo the disruptions we ourselves are leaving behind. One of the most haunting examples is the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, PETM, around 56 million years ago. In geological terms, it was abrupt, a few tens of thousands of years when global temperatures rose by as much as 8 degrees Celsius. Carbon isotopes shifted in a way eerily similar to what we see today. Oceans warmed, acidified, and species were forced to migrate or go extinct. The usual explanation is that volcanic activity or methane hydrates released vast amounts of greenhouse gases. But imagine for a moment that the same signal were discovered in sediments 100 million years from now. Would future scientists know it was the fingerprint of our industry? Or would they assume, as we do now, that it was only natural chaos? That is the difficulty of the geological record. It records what happened, but not who caused it. A sudden surge of carbon may look identical whether it came from volcanic eruptions or from coal furnaces. A band of soot in the rock might come from wildfires sparked by climate shifts or from industrial burning. Without context, the Earth's diary has no signatures, only changes. We already know how powerful these chemical fingerprints can be. Our own age, sometimes called the Anthropocene, is carving its mark in unmistakable ways. Plastics are embedding themselves into sediments, creating a future stratum of plastiglomerates. Nitrogen isotopes are shifting because of synthetic fertilizers. Radioactive isotopes from nuclear detonations are spread globally, a faint dusting detectable even in the most remote soils. Heavy metals from mining and industry seep into waterways, leaving deposits that future geologists will find concentrated in peculiar layers. To us, these are obvious markers of our presence. But what about a future intelligence, tens of millions of years ahead? Would they read these signals as industry, or as another inexplicable episode in Earth's long and restless history? There are other examples equally ambiguous. The end of the Permian period, over 250 million years ago, shows massive carbon disruptions, acidified oceans, and an extinction so severe that 9 out of 10 species perished. Explanations range from volcanic traps in Siberia to methane explosions. But what if such patterns could also be consistent with a global industry long erased? We cannot know. The scale of loss, the silence of the fossil record, and the recycling of Earth's crust mean we have only hints, not clarity. Sometimes the anomalies are even more puzzling. Layers enriched with heavy metals appear in places where no known process should concentrate them. Tiny glass spheres, tektites, scatter across layers, usually linked to impacts, yet sometimes their distributions raise questions. Spikes of carbon, sudden warming events, brief die-offs. Each is explained by natural theories, but each could in principle resemble the scars left by civilization. It is a question of interpretation, not of data. And interpretation is fragile. A century ago, few believed that an asteroid had killed the dinosaurs. The layer of iridium discovered worldwide was dismissed at first, until the hypothesis gained evidence and momentum. Now it is accepted as fact. If it took us so long to see the fingerprints of an asteroid, how much harder would it be to recognize the fingerprints of intelligence, especially if it did not look like our own? The shadows in the geological record remind us that memory comes in forms beyond bones and artifacts. The Earth remembers in chemistry. It holds whispers of carbon ratios, isotopes of nitrogen, shifts in oxygen trapped in ancient ice. These are durable, global, and nearly impossible to erase. They are also ambiguous, always capable of being explained as natural. To detect civilization in deep time would require not just anomalies, but a pattern of anomalies, layered and consistent, pointing beyond volcanoes or impacts to something deliberate. But that search itself is limited by perspective. We look for what we know, for plastics, for metals, for isotopes linked to our fuels. If another civilization had used resources unlike ours, burned substances we do not, or synthesized molecules unfamiliar to us, would we even recognize the signal? Or would it vanish into the category of unexplained anomaly, filed away and forgotten? The geological record is not generous. It offers fragments, not full chapters. It whispers of catastrophe, but not of cause. And within that ambiguity lies the haunting possibility. What if some of those shadows are not just nature's convulsions, but the fading echoes of lives and minds as real as ours? The rocks will not answer. They give us data, and we interpret. But in their silence is space. Space for humility, for the recognition that the Earth may carry more memory than we know how to read. And it is precisely this ambiguity, the possibility that natural chaos and deliberate action can look the same in stone, that has led some scientists to ask a daring question. How would we recognize civilization if it had come before us? Not all unsettling ideas come from the fringes. Sometimes they arise from the careful minds of scientists, spoken softly as thought experiments rather than declarations. In 2018, astrophysicist Adam Frank and climatologist Gavin Schmidt posed such a question. They asked, if an industrial civilization had arisen on Earth millions of years ago, how would we know? They called this inquiry the Silurian Hypothesis, borrowing its name from a fictional race of ancient reptiles in a British science fiction show. The name was playful, but the question was serious. It was not an assertion that civilizations truly lived here before us, but an exercise. A way to test the limits of geology and sharpen the tools we use to study planetary change. Their reasoning began with humility. The Earth is active. It buries, erases, and recycles. The crust is in motion, mountains rise and fall, oceans swallow coasts, glaciers grind landscapes to dust. In such a restless system, how much of our own existence would survive if viewed tens of millions of years from now? Would a future intelligence be able to see us clearly? Or would they only notice odd disruptions in chemistry, faint shadows of a species that once was? Frank and Schmidt argued that the most likely traces of any industrial civilization would not be monuments, machines, or even bones, but chemical signatures in the geological record. Civilization leaves fingerprints not by what it builds, but by how it consumes. Look at our world. Our industries have already changed the ratio of carbon isotopes in the atmosphere. Synthetic fertilizers have altered the nitrogen cycle in soils and waters worldwide. Plastics are embedding themselves into sediments, creating new rock-like composites called plastiglomerates. Heavy metals from mining are concentrated in unexpected layers. Radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing are globally distributed, detectable even in remote glaciers. These are markers that no natural process produces in such a sudden, global way. But here is the difficulty. The geological record is full of abrupt anomalies. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, PETM, shows sudden warming and a dramatic carbon isotope shift, eerily similar to our current Anthropocene. Massive volcanic eruptions, like the Siberian traps 250 million years ago, spewed gases that triggered climate chaos. Methane hydrates, once destabilized, can release vast amounts of greenhouse gas, mimicking industrial signals. The Earth has ways of producing disturbances that, on paper, look uncannily like the fingerprints of industry. This means that even if another civilization once rose and fell, its traces might be indistinguishable from natural catastrophe. The rocks would not label their origin. They would only record the disruption. The Silurian Hypothesis pushes us to think about durability. How long would our signals last? Plastics break down under sunlight, but buried deep, fragments could persist for millions of years. Nitrogen anomalies might fade as soils are recycled, but some chemical shifts could endure in sediment cores. Radioisotopes decay, yet some with long half-lives might remain measurable far into the future. But even then, the question is interpretation. To us, these signals are obvious signs of humanity. To another intelligence, millions of years later, they might appear as nothing more than another pulse of natural instability. This idea is unsettling not because it proves there were civilizations before us, but because it shows how easily we could be forgotten. We like to imagine permanence, to believe our cities and satellites will outlast us. But even at the height of our technological power, our mark on the planet may be little more than a thin layer in stone, a subtle anomaly in chemistry. To future eyes, it could be misread entirely. The hypothesis also reframes the search for life elsewhere. If we struggle to recognize traces of intelligence on our own planet, how much harder will it be on Mars, or Venus, or exoplanets orbiting distant stars? Already, planetary scientists look for biosignatures and technosignatures, chemical imbalances that suggest life or industry. But the Silurian hypothesis reminds us, signatures are ambiguous. Volcanoes and civilizations can leave similar scars. We must be cautious in our interpretations, whether on Earth or beyond. And yet, there is beauty in this caution. It invites us to humility. It says, the Earth may have carried more than one story of intelligence, but it will not give up those stories easily. They may be hidden in chemical shadows, in anomalies we already measure, but explain away as natural. They may be written into rocks we have yet to drill, buried beneath oceans or folded into mountains. Imagine a far future geologist, millions of years from now, holding a core sample from what was once our world. They see a spike in carbon, a dusting of radioactive isotopes, fragments of polymer. To them, it may look like the aftermath of volcanism, or perhaps the signature of a short, sharp warming event. They may never know that these signals were us. And if that is so, how can we be certain that the spikes we study in ancient rocks were not also whispers of someone else? The Silurian hypothesis leaves us not with proof, but with perspective. It reminds us that silence is not absence and that the evidence of intelligence may be fragile even on its home planet. It challenges us to see our own age with the eyes of deep time and to recognize how easily we too could be folded back into the Earth's long forgetting. Imagine a morning when the world wakes, but humanity does not. The streets are still full of cars, their engines silent. Airplanes sit frozen on runways, never to take off. Office lights glow for a few more hours until power grids, unattended, stumble and fail. In that first day, it looks as if nothing has changed. The world is intact, waiting for its people to return. But no one does. Within days, the fragility of our systems becomes clear. Power plants run out of fuel. Water stops flowing from taps. Food in refrigerators spoils, releasing the faint sourness of decay into empty kitchens. In subway tunnels, pumps fall silent and water seeps in, flooding platforms where posters curl and disintegrate. The skeleton of our civilization is already beginning to creak. Weeks pass, and the natural world pushes forward. Seeds blown by the wind find cracks in pavement. Grass pushes through sidewalks. Birds nest in traffic lights. Wolves and foxes reclaim suburbs, emboldened by the absence of people. In places like Chernobyl, we already see this transformation. An abandoned city swallowed by birch trees, apartment blocks cracked open by roots, deer wandering stairwells. What happened there in decades would spread everywhere in centuries. Within 100 years, most of what we built is broken. Skyscrapers, without maintenance, corrode and collapse. Glass falls from their frames, steel rusts, concrete crumbles. In wetter climates, entire neighborhoods disappear beneath vines and soil, as if swallowed by forest. Roads fracture, covered with moss. Bridges buckle. Dams silt up and collapse, their rivers carving new paths across forgotten fields. In deserts, outlines of cities linger longer, but sand steadily buries their walls. After 1,000 years, the planet has nearly erased us. Stone monuments remain. Mount Rushmore, its president's face is worn but still faintly visible. The pyramids of Giza, battered by erosion yet still recognizable. The statues of Easter Island, gazing across a world that no longer knows their names. But most traces are gone. Books have turned to dust. Digital records, dependent on fragile drives and servers, are unreadable. The vast libraries of the internet vanish more quickly than parchment. Memory retreats into stone, and even that is not safe forever. Push the clock to 10,000 years. Forests have covered continents. Ice ages may have come and gone. Mountains shed their skins in landslides. Even the great monuments are battered into near silence. Roads have become mere ridges in the soil. Skyscrapers lie in rubble. A few traces survive only by accident. A tunnel sealed deep underground, a fragment of plastic preserved in clay, a shard of glass encased in permafrost. These are the whispers of humanity. Not the towers we celebrated, but the refuse we forgot. At 100,000 years, the Earth has reshaped itself. Coastlines have shifted, seas have risen and fallen. Cities once near the shore are drowned, sealed beneath sediments. Our tallest monuments are gone, worn flat or buried. The most stubborn signals are invisible to the naked eye. Chemical fingerprints locked in strata. Carbon isotopes marking the sudden combustion of fossil fuels. Nitrogen anomalies from fertilizers. Radioactive dust from nuclear detonations. Plastics ground into microfragments, distributed like sand through layers of earth. This is our true monument. A thin, strange line in stone, global and unnatural. Now stretch the thought to 1,000,000 years. Continents have drifted. Glaciers have scoured the north again. Volcanoes have erupted, burying valleys in lava. New rivers carve new canyons. The landscape is different, but the record remains in fragments beneath. A geologist of the far future might drill a core and find a peculiar signal. A brief, sharp anomaly in the chemistry of the Earth, distinct from the layers above and below. They would puzzle over it, debating whether it was volcanism, methane release, or something they cannot name. Would they ever imagine that it was us? The thought experiment is humbling. We are surrounded by technologies and monuments that feel indestructible. Satellites ring our planet, skyscrapers pierce the sky, highways crisscross continents. Yet all of it is fragile when set against the scale of deep time. Even our digital memory, billions of documents, images, and voices, is more fragile than a clay tablet or a painted cave wall. Without constant tending, the record of our age dissolves. We like to believe that we are permanent, but the Earth teaches otherwise. It reminds us that memory is selective, that survival in stone is rare, and that silence is the norm. If we disappeared tomorrow, our story would survive only as faint residue, a line of chemistry, an odd spike in isotopes, a scattering of artificial molecules. To a future intelligence, that might look like civilization, or it might look like yet another strange natural catastrophe in a long, restless history. And if this is true for us, then the same could be true for others. If a civilization came and went millions of years ago, the silence we hear today may not be absence, but the inevitable consequence of time. Stand on a shoreline and watch the tide come in. Each wave seems small, harmless, a repeating breath of the planet. But wait long enough, and you will see its true nature. Waves grind cliffs into sand, storms reshape coastlines in a single night, and currents carry entire landscapes away. The ocean is patient. It does not conquer quickly, but over centuries and millennia, it swallows everything. Civilizations have always been drawn to water. Rivers, deltas, bays, and seas offer food, fertile soil, and pathways for trade. Nearly every culture we know began near a coastline. Yet this closeness is also perilous. Coasts are fragile boundaries, constantly redrawn by rising seas and shifting currents. When the last ice age ended, glaciers melted, and oceans rose more than 100 meters. In that surge, entire continents of memory disappeared beneath the waves. One of the clearest examples lies in the North Sea. Today, its grey waters churn with ships and wind farms. But not long ago, in geological terms, this was a vast plain called Doggerland, connecting Britain to mainland Europe. For thousands of years, people hunted deer, fished rivers, and built homes there. Now it is gone. Fishermen sometimes pull up mammoth bones or stone tools in their nets, but the landscape itself is lost beneath the sea. Its valleys, its forests, its heaths are hidden forever. Far to the south, off the coast of India, lies Dwarka. Local traditions speak of a city drowned by the sea, a place where temples once shone. Beneath the waves, divers have found stone structures arranged like walls and steps. Are these natural formations or traces of an ancient port? Debate continues, but the ocean makes certainty difficult. Currents scatter, coral grows over stone, visibility clouds the evidence. Even if Dwarka was once a city, much of its memory is already erased. In Greece, the submerged town of Pavlopetri lies just a few meters below the water. Streets, courtyards, and buildings can still be traced, 5,000 years after they were abandoned. It is one of the oldest known sunken cities in the world, yet even here preservation is precarious. The sea is not a gentle archivist. Waves roll, sediments shift, and walls collapse. Another few thousand years, and Pavlopetri too will vanish into sand. These sites are young compared to deep time. They belong to the last few millennia, yet already they are nearly gone. Extend the clock further, and the ocean becomes not just a threat but a certainty. The seafloor itself is temporary. Through the process of subduction, oceanic crust is recycled into the mantle every 200 million years or so. What is swallowed is melted, erased beyond recognition. If a civilization once lived along ancient coastlines, as ours has, its cities would not just be buried. They would be unmade. And yet the ocean leaves faint traces. Modern science already finds them. Plastics, drifting even into the deepest trenches, forming clouds of microscopic fragments, radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing, detectable across Pacific waters, mercury, lead, and other heavy metals accumulating in sediments. These signals spread quickly and globally, embedding themselves in layers of seabed. They may outlast monuments, lingering as thin chemical scars long after the builders are gone. Still, interpretation is never simple. When geologists drill into ancient sediments, they sometimes find similar anomalies. Sudden chemical shifts, unexplained deposits, brief spikes in temperature and acidity. The default assumption is natural disaster. Volcanism, methane release, asteroid impact. But what if once the cause was different? What if the ocean is not only an eraser, but also a hiding place, its sediments carrying faint echoes of civilizations drowned long ago? The sea is both cradle and grave. It nurtures life, sustains culture, and then reclaims it. It erases landscapes more thoroughly than wind or ice. Coastlines are the stage where humanity has always flourished, yet they are also the first places to vanish. If we disappeared, the ocean would erase us swiftly, drowning ports and cities, scattering our remains into the sand. The land remembers imperfectly. The sea remembers almost nothing at all, and so a question lingers. If countless flood myths around the world speak of lands lost beneath rising waters, are they only allegories, or are they distorted memories of real cities that the ocean has already erased? What do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Were these myths just stories, or faint memories of something real? Every so often, a story emerges from the ground that doesn't quite fit. A miner splits open a lump of coal and claims to find a tiny iron bell inside. A stone quarried from deep underground appears to contain the impression of a nail. In South Africa, mysterious metallic spheres with shallow grooves turn up in Precambrian rock more than 2 billion years old. These reports are gathered under one name: out-of-place artifacts. OO-parts. Objects that, if genuine, would not belong where they are found. Skeptics rightly point out that most OO-parts have simple explanations. Mining is messy. Coal seams collapse, dragging in modern debris. Natural concretions can mimic artificial shapes. Geological processes produce spheres, cubes, even lattice-like crystals. And in the 19th and early 20th centuries, when many of these claims were first reported, standards of documentation were far looser than today. Without context, clear stratigraphy, photographs, repeatable evidence, such anomalies drift quickly into legend. And yet, the persistence of these stories speaks to something deeper. We want to believe that the past is stranger than we've been told. We want the possibility that other hands shaped the world long before ours. Even when most OO-parts are explained away, a few remain stubbornly ambiguous. The Klerksdorp spheres, for example, continue to puzzle collectors. Studies suggest they are natural hematite concretions, but their symmetry and those faint grooves make them feel almost deliberate. Then there are genuine mysteries that, while not truly out of place, stretch our understanding. The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a Greek shipwreck, is over 2,000 years old. A bronze machine of astonishing precision, capable of predicting eclipses and planetary movements. When first studied, it seemed impossible for its time. Today we recognize it as real, but also as a reminder. History is full of surprises. Sophistication does not always arrive when or where we expect it. So what should we do with OO-parts? Most are curiosities, accidents, or fabrications. But together they illustrate an important point. Our interpretations are limited by context. A carved stone in a museum is an artifact. The same stone, found in a coal seam, might be dismissed as contamination. Our expectations shape our conclusions, and if another civilization truly did rise millions of years ago, its remnants, if any survived, would almost certainly look like anomalies. A shard here, a layer there, objects without context. Most would be ignored or reclassified. Some might sit in drawers of museums, labelled unidentified. In other words, the past may already have shown us its hand, but we didn't recognise the cards. Artifacts, real or imagined, are one kind of clue. But stories are another. Even when objects vanish, memories can linger. Compressed into myth, reshaped across generations, but not entirely lost. And among the world's oldest myths, one theme returns again and again: the Great Flood. Long before archaeology and geology, humanity remembered its past in stories. These stories were carried in chants, woven into songs, carved into symbols, and passed from parent to child across generations. They bent with time, shifting with each retelling, but beneath the variations, certain themes remained remarkably constant. One of the most enduring is the flood. Across Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh recounts a deluge so vast it wiped away almost all life, leaving only a chosen survivor in a boat. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah builds his ark, guided by divine warning. In Hindu tradition, Manu is rescued by a fish who tells him to prepare for waters that will engulf the world. In Norse myth, great waves are said to swallow the land. In the Americas, peoples from the Andes to the plains speak of floods that reset the order of the world. The details shift, but the structure is the same. Water rises, land disappears, and humanity begins again. For centuries, scholars interpreted these stories as allegories, metaphors for seasonal rains, moral warnings about pride, or symbolic resets of culture. Yet geology reveals that at the end of the last ice age, seas rose more than 100 meters, swallowing coastlines where countless communities once lived. To those who survived, the world must have seemed to drown. Is it any wonder, then, that stories of a flood spread so widely, etched into cultural memory long after the waters receded? Flood myths are not alone. Many traditions speak of lost lands. Plato wrote of Atlantis, a prosperous island that fell to the sea because of its arrogance. Tamil traditions tell of Kumari Kandam, a southern land lost beneath the ocean. 19th century speculation invented Lemuria, a vanished continent said to have once bridged the Indian Ocean. Celtic sailors spoke of High Brazil, a phantom island west of Ireland, visible only once every 7 years. Some of these are fictions, others symbolic, and some may be exaggerations of real places now drowned, but the persistence of the motif, a land that flourished and then vanished, is difficult to ignore. Equally striking are myths of knowledge once possessed and then lost. Some cultures speak of a golden age when humanity was closer to the gods, when wisdom flowed freely, when we understood the stars. Others tell of teachers who came before, culture bringers who shared agriculture, astronomy, or tools, and then departed. These figures appear in different forms: Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, Oannes in Mesopotamia, Viracocha in the Andes. Whether gods, ancestors, or symbols, they represent a recurring memory. That knowledge once arrived from outside, carried by others who were already wise. The transmission of myth is not perfect, but it can be astonishingly persistent. Aboriginal Australians preserve oral traditions describing coastlines from more than 7,000 years ago, stories that align with geological reconstructions of post-glacial sea rise. In the Pacific, Polynesian navigation charts map stars and islands across thousands of miles, preserving geography far beyond the reach of writing. Memory, even when told as story, can survive for millennia. If it can last that long, might it not also carry faint echoes from deeper time, distorted but not entirely lost? And myths do more than describe floods or vanished lands. They also carry imagery of fire, sky, and machines. Hindu texts speak of vimanas, aerial chariots with the power to traverse the heavens. Ancient epics describe weapons that sound eerily like explosions, thunderbolts, or scorching fire. In Greek myth, Hephaestus forges automatons of bronze. In Jewish apocrypha, fiery wheels ascend into the sky. Scholars explain these as metaphor, poetic exaggeration, or attempts to describe natural forces. Yet the imagery sometimes carries a strange precision, as though memory and imagination were entwined. None of this proves that forgotten civilizations once existed, but myths show us how memory works. Fragmentary, metaphorical, sometimes distorted, but not always without a kernel of truth. They remind us that not all history is written in stone or bone. Some is carried in the human voice, in the rhythm of stories told across generations. And sometimes those stories align with what we later discover in soil and rock. Perhaps then, myths are not only stories of gods and heroes, perhaps they are also memory's last defense against forgetting, a way for the past to whisper across time even when its monuments have fallen. If that is so, then they deserve to be listened to carefully, not only for what they tell us directly, but for what they might hint at indirectly. And when we listen closely, we notice something else. Not all civilizations leave monuments of stone or writing on clay. Some may have lived in forms almost invisible to the geological and archaeological record. A people could rise, flourish, and vanish, leaving little more than traces in soil, altered landscapes, or faint echoes in myth. To imagine such civilizations, we must free ourselves from the expectation of permanence and ask whether complexity can thrive even without the durability of metal or stone. When we think of civilization, our minds instinctively picture the hardness of stone, the gleam of bronze, the strength of iron. Our very language divides history into ages named for materials: Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, as if metallurgy were the only road to complexity. But what if civilization did not always follow that path? What if intelligence thrived in ways that left behind almost nothing for us to find? Consider how much of our own daily life is built from fragile things: houses framed in timber, floors of woven reed, walls of clay brick, furniture carved from wood, clothes stitched from fibre, tools of bone and shell. Even today, when steel and concrete dominate, much of what we use would vanish in decades without maintenance. Paper yellows and crumbles. Textiles rot in damp soil. Wood is devoured by insects, fungi, and fire. A city built entirely of organic material could dissolve into the earth within centuries, leaving little more than discoloured soil where homes once stood. Archaeology already struggles with this bias. From prehistoric Europe, only stone tools remain in abundance, while wood, hide, and rope are almost entirely gone. Yet occasional finds remind us of what we miss. In Denmark's peat bogs, wooden carts and paddles survive, sealed by oxygen-poor mud. In waterlogged caves, fragments of woven baskets or fibres appear, astonishingly delicate but enduring by chance. These rare glimpses tell us that prehistoric societies were far richer in material culture than stone tools alone suggest. The absence of organic artifacts is not proof they never existed, only that they did not survive. In the Amazon basin, scientists discovered something even more subtle: terra preta, or dark earth. These soils, enriched by ancient peoples with charcoal bone and organic waste, remained fertile centuries after their makers vanished. For generations they were mistaken for natural patches of unusually rich earth. Only careful study revealed them as deliberate engineering, created to sustain agriculture in otherwise poor rainforest soils. No temples or palaces mark the people who made them. Their legacy is dirt, yet dirt transformed by knowledge. This example is powerful because it shows how a civilization can reshape the environment in ways that last long after its structures are gone. If such a society had flourished 10,000 years earlier, or 10 million years earlier, its memory might be reduced to nothing more than soil chemistry. Without context, we would never recognize it as the footprint of intelligence. We also know that early humans themselves lived most of their history without metal. For hundreds of thousands of years, societies built homes, made tools, created art, and organized communities without forging bronze or iron. They mastered fire, tracked the stars, carved symbolic figurines, and painted caves with animals and rituals. None of these required metal. Complexity does not always mean metallurgy. A society might carry wisdom, trade, and ritual without ever smelting ore. The more we learn, the more we realize how much bias shapes our expectations. We look for stone and metal because those are what survive. But survival is not the same as presence. If another civilization had flourished in deep time using only perishable materials, their traces would be nearly invisible. Their dwellings would rot, their tools crumble, their art fade. Only in the rarest of conditions, sealed in ice, encased in ash, drowned in anaerobic mud, might a fragment survive. And even then, without a framework to understand it, we might dismiss it as natural. This possibility reframes our understanding of lost civilizations. They need not be monumental. They need not leave behind pyramids or standing stones. They might have chosen or been limited to materials that time does not honor. Imagine a people whose architecture was bamboo, whose records were knotted cords, whose tools were bone and hardwood, whose knowledge lived in song. To them the world might have been vibrant, structured, enduring. To us their existence would be silence. Civilization, after all, is not measured only in metal. It is measured in the ability to organize life beyond survival, to pass memory across generations, to reshape the environment in lasting ways. If soils can hold such a legacy in the Amazon, perhaps other forgotten landscapes do too. Faint chemical marks, altered ecologies, patterns we have not yet recognized. And this silence, this invisibility, does not end at artifacts or soils. It may extend even into us. For while bones and tools vanish, the body carries memory in another form, in strands of DNA, passed like whispers through time, leaving traces of peoples who are otherwise gone. Deep inside every one of us is a record that no library holds. It is not carved on stone or written on parchment, but folded within the spirals of DNA. This record is older than any monument, older than the first city, older even than our species itself. It carries whispers of ancestors we never knew, shadows of peoples who lived and died and left no artifacts we can touch. Scientists call them ghost populations, groups that shaped us genetically, yet left behind almost no physical trace. The story of the Denisovans is perhaps the most striking example. For most of human history, no one knew they existed. They left behind no standing stones, no clear tools that we can confidently attribute to them. What we have is astonishingly slight, a finger bone and a few teeth found in a cave in Siberia. Yet from these fragments, scientists sequenced DNA that told an unexpected story. Here was a branch of humanity distinct from both Neanderthals and modern humans. Not only that, but their genetic legacy lives on today. In parts of Asia and Oceania, Denisovan DNA contributes to traits in immune systems and even high-altitude adaptation, as seen among the peoples of Tibet. A civilization, or at least a lineage, that we once knew nothing about still shapes our bodies, even though their bones are nearly absent from the earth. And the Denisovans are not alone. In Africa, genetic studies have uncovered evidence of other ancient populations that interbred with early humans. These groups left no known fossils, or if they did, we have not yet recognized them. They are invisible to archaeology, yet their DNA lives in us. They walked the earth, spoke languages, made tools, raised children, and died, and all of that has been almost completely erased, save for the faintest signals written into blood and bone. Even the Neanderthals, once thought to be brutish and entirely separate, are now recognized as part of us. They too left their mark in our genes, resistance to certain diseases, variations in skin and hair, traces in our immune systems. A people once dismissed as extinct cave dwellers are now understood as kin, contributors to our own story. But imagine how easily their memory could have been lost. Without preserved skeletons, without caves that sheltered their remains, we might have known them only as another ghost lineage revealed by DNA. These discoveries carry an unsettling implication. If entire human groups, close relatives, contemporaries, neighbours, can vanish almost completely in the space of tens of thousands of years, leaving only subtle genetic echoes, how much more could disappear across millions of years? What if complexity, even civilization, rose and fell in forms we cannot detect, leaving no stone monuments or durable tools, only fleeting imprints in lineages long since gone? DNA reminds us that history is not linear. It is tangled, braided, interwoven. Different human species overlapped, met and mingled. Some lineages contributed, others disappeared. And while bones and artifacts tell only fragments of that story, our bodies carry a more continuous memory. Each of us is a living archive, carrying traces of peoples whose names we will never know, but even this memory is fragile. DNA itself degrades with time. Beyond a certain point, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years. Even the best preserved samples crumble into unreadable fragments. Ghost populations within our reach today may represent only the nearest shadows. Those further back are lost forever. If civilizations rose before humanity, their memory may have vanished completely from biology, leaving us with only myth, stone, and soil to search. And yet, the lesson of genetic ghosts is profound. It shows that existence can be forgotten, even when it was close, even when it shaped us. Peoples can vanish into silence, their presence visible only through the faintest residues. Civilization too could follow that path. It could live, flourish, and vanish, leaving no ruins but altering the world in ways subtle and enduring. If DNA can carry memories of forgotten peoples, then landscapes can carry memories of forgotten cities. Just as a gene passed forward reveals an ancestor, so too a carved pillar or a buried street can reveal a culture once thought impossible for its time. To glimpse those traces, we must turn from our inner archive to the stones of the outer world, where cities older than our histories wait to be remembered. On a hill in southeastern Turkey, a farmer's plough once struck stone. It was 1994. What emerged from the soil would challenge the very foundations of history. Beneath layers of earth lay massive carved pillars, arranged in circles, decorated with reliefs of animals, lions, foxes, vultures. Some stones weighed more than 10 tons, shaped and lifted into place by hands that had no metal tools, no wheels, no writing. This was Göbekli Tepe, and when it was dated, the result astonished scholars. Nearly 12,000 years old, twice as old as Stonehenge, older than agriculture in many parts of the world. For generations, archaeologists believed that cities and monuments required farming first. Surplus crops were thought to be the foundation of complex society, yet Göbekli Tepe inverted that story. Here were monumental structures built by hunter-gatherers, people who, until then, were assumed to lack the organization and surplus labor needed for such feats. Instead of agriculture creating society, it seemed that ritual and shared vision may have created agriculture. The timeline bent backward, suggesting that civilization's roots are older, stranger, and more elusive than we thought. Thousands of miles away, in the Super Valley of Peru, another surprise waited. Rising from the desert are the remains of Cradle, a city more than 5,000 years old. Its monumental platform mounds, sunken plazas, and intricate staircases rival the scale of the Egyptian pyramids. Yet Cradle's people left no evidence of warfare. No weapons, no fortifications, no armies. Instead, their legacy seems to be trade networks, musical instruments carved from condor bones, and careful agricultural planning along the dry Pacific coast. Here was another reminder that complexity takes many forms. Civilization is not only measured in conquests, but in architecture, ritual, and the weaving of communities. Far across the ocean, in the remote islands of Micronesia, lie the ruins of Nan Madol. Built upon a coral lagoon, its foundations are made of basalt columns stacked like logs, forming artificial islets connected by canals. Sometimes called the Venice of the Pacific, Nan Madol was once the ceremonial and political centre of the Sodelur dynasty, but even local legends describe its construction as otherworldly, the work of people with powers beyond ordinary strength. Today the site is silent, haunted by stories and tides. Its origin remains partly mysterious, not because we cannot date it, but because the ambition of building such a place in such a location feels almost beyond belief. And there are more. The ancient city of Jericho, perhaps the oldest continuously inhabited settlement on Earth, shows layers of occupation stretching back over 10,000 years. Its early walls suggest organized defense long before the Bronze Age. The ruins of Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley reveal careful urban planning, standardized brickwork, and advanced drainage systems, yet no towering monuments or palaces. The sophistication lies not in spectacle, but in civic design, an achievement too easily overlooked until the site was uncovered. Each of these cities defies expectations. Each tells us that human ingenuity has surfaced in places and times we did not anticipate, and each should humble us, because they reveal how often history is rewritten by a single discovery. For centuries, the timeline of civilization seemed fixed. Then Göbekli Tepe appeared, and the roots stretched deeper. Corral rose from Peru's desert, showing that pyramids were not unique to Egypt. Nan Madol's canals spoke of maritime kingdoms we scarcely imagined. Mohenjo-Daro reminded us that sophistication does not always shout from monuments. Sometimes it hides in sewers and bricks. If this is true for the last 10,000 years, what of the last 100,000? The last million? What else might lie buried beneath deserts, jungles, or oceans, waiting for accident or persistence to reveal it? Each new city we uncover is not just a place. It is a warning that our knowledge is provisional, fragile, and always subject to change. It is also a reminder of memory itself. Some cities are remembered in legend, like Atlantis, or in scripture, like Jericho. Others, like Göbekli Tepe, were erased from memory entirely until the earth gave them back to us. Time buries not only walls but stories. What we think of as the beginning may simply be the latest rediscovery, one more cycle of emergence from the soil. The stones of these cities still stand, but they are silent. Their builders are gone, their languages unknown, their rituals only guessed. And yet, in their silence, they speak. They tell us that civilization is older and more diverse than we believed. They tell us that memory can be hidden, not lost. And they tell us that stone, above all, is the most stubborn messenger across time. From here, our gaze lingers on the stones themselves. Those blocks and walls whose size and precision whisper of something more, echoes that seem to resist explanation even when we think we know their makers. Walk among the ruins of Baalbek in Lebanon, and you feel small. Rising from the ground are stones so vast they seem impossible to have been moved. The Trilithon, 3 blocks set side by side in a retaining wall, each weighs more than 800 tons. They lie stacked with such precision that the joins are nearly seamless. Later cultures, from the Romans to the Byzantines, built their temples here, but the foundation feels older, heavier, almost otherworldly. Who first conceived this? And why did they build on such an immense scale? Cross the ocean to the Andean Plateau, and the ruins of Puma Punku scatter across the high plain near Lake Titicaca. Here, giant andesite blocks lie tumbled like the toys of giants. Many are carved into interlocking H shapes, drilled with perfect holes, their edges unnervingly sharp. Archaeologists attribute them to the Tiwanaku culture around 1,500 years ago, yet the stonework feels like it belongs to a deeper legacy, as though the builders inherited techniques whose origins are obscured. Standing there, the precision of the cuts and the weight of the blocks whisper of knowledge both familiar and strange. Far out in the Pacific, on the remote island of Rapa Nui, better known as Easter Island, most visitors come to see the Moai statues. But another mystery lies in the Vinapu site. Here, basalt slabs are fitted together with a precision reminiscent of Inca masonry thousands of miles away in South America. The stones lock so tightly that even centuries of weathering have not pried them apart. How did islanders with limited resources shape and set these blocks with such exactness? Coincidence, independent invention, or echoes of a shared knowledge long since lost? The Andes themselves are a landscape of stone enigmas. At Sacsayhuaman, above the city of Cusco, massive limestone walls rise in zigzag terraces. Each block is irregular, yet they fit together like a puzzle, joints so close that even a knife blade cannot slip between them. The walls have stood for centuries through earthquakes that leveled nearby colonial buildings. Their stability seems almost purposeful, as though the builders knew how to lock stone against the trembling of the earth. At Ollantaytambo, colossal stones weighing up to 50 tons were hauled from a quarry across a river and up steep slopes, arranged with equal precision. To walk among them is to feel the weight of forgotten labour, effort that defies easy explanation. In Britain, Stonehenge stands as another echo. The circle of standing stones, some transported from quarries hundreds of kilometres away, aligns with solstices in ways that suggest careful astronomical awareness. While smaller than Baalbek or Sacsayhuaman, the achievement is no less striking. Neolithic peoples, without metal tools, organized the transport and erection of stones weighing up to 25 tons. The site is a reminder that precision need not always take the form of tight-fitting walls. Sometimes it is written in alignments with the sky itself. These stones endure because they resist time better than wood or clay, but their endurance carries ambiguity. Nature, too, can fracture rock into straight lines, create pillars, or produce symmetry through chance. Without inscriptions, without clear tools left nearby, the line between natural formation and human craftsmanship can blur. And even when the builders are known, the reasons for scale, technique, or alignment often remain elusive. The silence of stone is both durable and enigmatic. What ties all these sites together is a sense of resonance. The stones feel like messages, but the language is unclear. They tell us that the people who shaped them were capable of feats we struggle to replicate, whether in transport, cutting, or planning. Yet they tell us little about the minds behind the work. We do not know the songs sung during construction, the rituals that sanctified the labour, or the myths that justified such monumental effort. We see the echo, not the voice. This echo humbles us. It reminds us that civilization is not measured only in texts or tools. It can also be written in stone, in weight, in silence. These structures endure not because they were meant for us, but because they were built to outlast time itself. And when they do, they take on new meaning, becoming puzzles for the future rather than simple expressions of the past. Standing before them, one feels a sense of recurrence, as if knowledge rises, fades, and rises again, carried in stone across the cycles of time. Perhaps what we see in these walls is not just the work of isolated cultures, but faint reminders of a deeper rhythm, a rhythm in which civilizations emerge, create, and then vanish, leaving only fragments that hint at what once was. The stones do not answer our questions, but they refuse to be silent. They are echoes, not of certainty, but of possibility. And in those echoes we sense the outlines of time folding back on itself, suggesting that what has been may rise again. From here our gaze turns not only to what is built, but to what is erased. Civilizations, no matter how mighty, stand for a while, then fade into silence. Their rise and fall form cycles, patterns that repeat across centuries and aeons. Beyond the echoes of stone lies the vanishing point itself, the moment where history dissolves into deep time. We like to picture history as a staircase, each step a triumph, each rise a permanent ascent. From caves to villages, villages to cities, cities to empires, the line feels upward, inevitable. But when we look closely, the image falters. Civilizations rise and fall, not in steady progression but in waves. Each time the tide recedes, memory goes with it. The past is not a staircase, but a shoreline, built and erased again and again. Take the Maya. For centuries, they built cities of stone in the jungles of Central America, charted the stars, invented complex calendars, raised monuments covered in glyphs. Yet their great urban centers were abandoned, swallowed by vines, left to silence. The reasons remain debated: drought, war, political collapse, but the effect was the same. To later generations, the forest seemed eternal, concealing the fact that cities once thrived beneath its canopy. Consider the Indus Valley civilization, with Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa laid out in precise grids, equipped with advanced drainage and standardized bricks. Their society stretched across vast plains, trading with Mesopotamia and beyond. Yet around 1900 BCE, it unraveled. Climate shifts, changing rivers, and social stresses may have played a role. What remains is impressive, but incomplete. Their script is undeciphered. Their rulers, their rituals, their voices are silent. Or the Bronze Age collapse, when the interconnected kingdoms around the Mediterranean fell within a century. Egypt survived only by retreating into itself. The Mycenaeans vanished. The Hittites disappeared. Trade networks that spanned continents crumbled. The world shrank, literacy declined, and centuries passed before complexity returned. To the survivors, it must have felt like the end of all things. To us, it is another reminder of how fragile complexity can be. And beyond history lie the deeper catastrophes. The Permian-Triassic extinction, 252 million years ago, erased 90% of species. The Cretaceous-Paleogene event, 66 million years ago, ended the reign of the dinosaurs in a geological instant. Between these bookends are countless smaller crises: volcanic winters, sudden warming events, plagues that hollowed empires, famines that drove migrations. Each reset not only life, but memory. Whatever stories the Earth carried were fractured, scattered, or erased. The pattern is not one of constant ascent, but of cycles. Each civilization, no matter how mighty, rises, flourishes, and falls. What remains are fragments: a wall here, a tablet there, a story carried into myth. And over long enough spans of time, even those fragments are lost. The further we look back, the more gaps appear. At some point, the gaps widen until they swallow everything. This is the vanishing point of time, the place where memory fails and silence begins. The vanishing point humbles us. It shows us how even recent civilizations can slip away almost completely. The Mayans once ruled from Crete, building palaces filled with colour and light. For centuries they were remembered only as the people of the labyrinth in Greek myth. Their real history had to be dug from ruins, their voices reconstructed from tablets left by chance. Extend that silence across millennia, and civilizations vanish not just from stone but from imagination. It also shows us that collapse is not an exception, but a rhythm. Complexity breeds fragility. The more intricate the web of trade, communication, and technology, the easier it is to tear. A drought disrupts food, a plague spreads through cities, a war severs roots, and suddenly the great structure crumbles. Survivors endure, but their world contracts. Over generations, memory contracts too. Knowledge is forgotten. Myths replace history, and in time even myths fade. What remains at the vanishing point is not certainty, but suggestion. A scatter of ruins beneath jungle, a shard of pottery in sand, a chemical anomaly in rock, a myth of a flood, a golden age, a fall. The rest is silence. This is why we must be cautious when we say, we are the first. Perhaps we are, or perhaps we are only the latest, the newest cycle in a pattern that has repeated before. The Earth has carried countless ages, each with its own life, its own triumphs, its own disasters. Why should we believe intelligence and complexity happened only once? The vanishing point leaves room for humility and for mystery. And yet something persists across the cycles, not full memory, but resonance. The idea that knowledge can reappear after loss. That stone can be raised again after centuries of silence. That myths can carry fragments long after facts are gone. These echoes do not defeat the vanishing point, but they resist it faintly. They are reminders that the past is not entirely erased, only folded, waiting for rediscovery. Time is vast. Civilizations are brief, but within their rise and fall lies a rhythm older than history. And when we listen closely, we hear it fading into silence, only to return again. Beyond the vanishing point, beyond collapse and forgetting, something still lingers. Not certainty, but awe. From here we drift toward the quiet edge of the question itself. Not answers, but reflection. Not monuments, but silence. Not endings, but the possibility that others may have walked here before us, their memory carried not in stone or story, but in the stillness of the earth. Dawn settles over the horizon, washing the world in pale light. Imagine yourself standing in a field where no ruins rise, no monuments tower, no inscriptions remain. The silence is almost complete. And yet beneath your feet the earth carries memories older than mountains, older than seas. They are not written in words but in layers of stone, in subtle shifts of chemistry, in fragments too faint for certainty. This is where the question lingers, quiet and unresolved. What if we're not Earth's first civilization? We like to believe permanence is possible, that pyramids, libraries, or satellites can hold our story against the tide of time. But the planet teaches otherwise. It erases. It recycles. It folds memory back into itself. Even our most durable signals, plastics, isotopes, altered soils, may one day vanish or be mistaken for natural disasters. If others came before us, their legacies may have been erased in the same way, leaving us with nothing more than shadows we misinterpret. Perhaps intelligence is not unique, but recurrent. Perhaps civilizations bloom like flowers in spring, brilliant and fragile, fading before their seeds are fully sown. Some may have vanished in cataclysm, others may have chosen to live lightly, leaving almost nothing behind. Still others may have reached heights we cannot imagine, only to dissolve back into silence. Their stories, if they existed, belong now to folded time, erased legacies, and echoes hidden in the dark. But even without certainty, the question itself has power. It humbles us. It reminds us that our own civilization, as vast as it feels, is young, precarious, and temporary. It invites us to wonder whether progress is a straight line or a cycle, whether we are a first, a last, or just one in a series of flickers across Earth's deep history. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, let the question rest beside you. Don't seek an answer. Let the stillness carry you, the way the Earth has carried all who came before, known and unknown. Somewhere in that stillness, in the space between story and silence, you may sense the company of those forgotten minds, not as voices, but as presence. Not as evidence, but as possibility. And if this journey has stirred your curiosity, if you found comfort in the mystery, know that you are part of a quiet fellowship of wanderers, people who, across time, have looked into the dark and asked, what if? Wherever you are, whenever you are, thank you for walking this path tonight. If you'd like to keep wandering with us through history, myth, and mystery, consider joining by subscribing, so these questions can find you again. For now, rest. The Earth turns, the silence holds, and the question remains. Sleep well, time traveller.